The stadium in Luanda in Angola is packed past its limit. It's a warm night in 1985, and there's a crowd in the tens of thousands standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark. By far the largest the band has ever played to up until that point, in a country that is at this exact moment still fighting a civil war. Jacob Desvarieux is standing on a stage looking out at all of them. He can't see the edges of the crowd. It just keeps going. He's a guitarist, and though he was born in Paris, he grew up shuttling between two islands, Guadeloupe, where his mother was from, and Martinique, where a hurricane once flattened the family home and sent them looking for somewhere else to land. Both islands are small, French and Caribbean, thousands of kilometers from where he is standing that night. He never thought he'd be there, in front of that huge crowd. The band strikes the first note of a song called Zouk la seule médicament nous nie. Zouk is the only medicine we have. The crowd goes wild. Desvarieux will talk about this night for the rest of his life, about the band from two small islands whose music lands harder in Portuguese-speaking Angola than it landed almost anywhere else on Earth. To understand why, we have to go back 6 years and travel to Paris. Guadeloupe and Martinique are two French Caribbean islands, and they are not independent countries. In 1946, France reclassified its Caribbean colonies as overseas departments, meaning full French territory rather than possessions, and governed from Paris, using French currency and teaching French history in French schools. There are some people on the island who feel that this is equality, but there are others who call this colonialism with better paperwork, and both those readings still exist to this day. The people who live there speak French Creole at home. It's a language born out of slavery and out of enslaved Africans and the French enslavers having to build a way to communicate. In the France of the 1970s, Creole is treated as broken French, something to be corrected out of you. So when young musicians from Guadeloupe and Martinique move to Paris, which many of them do, looking for work, they arrive into unsolicited judgment. They are French citizens, but French society constantly makes them feel like they are not quite French enough. Pierre Décimus is one of these musicians. He's a bass player from Guadeloupe, and by 1979 he has been playing in Paris for years in a band called Le Viking de Guadeloupe. Jacob Desvarieux is another. He's younger and he's Paris-born, but also raised partly in the Caribbean and partly in Dakar, Senegal, where his family lived for years. He grew up listening to Jimi Hendrix and Chuck Berry and picked up a guitar because of them. By the late 70s, he's a session musician, one of the anonymous and reliable players that Parisian studios call when they need someone who can really play. In 1979, Décimus and Desvarieux decide to build something together. Along with Décimus's brother Georges, also a bassist, and a rotating handful of other musicians, they start making a new kind of Caribbean music. The group sets out to build something new. They start with the gwoka, a tradition built by enslaved Africans in Guadeloupe. The ka drum itself is made from an old barrel and stretched goat skin. And gwoka is never just drumming. It's drumming, call and response, singing in Creole, and dance, all together, usually at night in a circle. It moves fast and gathers people after dark, which is exactly why colonial authorities periodically banned it outright. They take tibwa, Martinique's own version of the same story, a drum and dance tradition built by enslaved people banned by their enslavers. Interestingly, in 1848, an enslaved man named Romain was arrested for refusing to stop playing. His arrest helped set off the uprising that ended slavery on that island that same year. They take compas, sometimes called cadence lipso, a dance music that had already been traveling between Haiti and the smaller islands for years. They run all of that through drum machines and synthesizers with the earliest digital recording tools available in a Paris studio. But that use of new technology is not the real invention. The real invention is the decision underneath it, to stop making Guadeloupean music or Martinican music and start making something that belonged to the whole French Caribbean at once. For them, no single island sound was going to be enough for what they were trying to build. They named the band Kassav. It means cassava bread, and that word was not chosen to impress anyone in Paris. Cassava is a staple food of the kind every household on the islands has in their cupboards. Desvarieux will later describe what they were doing in an interview with the French newspaper Libération. They wanted, he said, a soundtrack that pulled together every Caribbean tradition that came before them, but built to travel and be exportable anywhere. Now, their success is not instant. Their first album in 1979 and 1980, called Love and Cadence, lays the groundwork, but the sound is still finding its final shape over the next few records. It takes until 1984 for the breakthrough to arrive with a single called Zouk la seul médicament nous nie. Music is the only medicine we have. In 1985, they played their first sold-out show at the Zenith in Paris, a large concert venue, and it's by most accounts the first time any Caribbean band has filled it. The following year, their Antillean Carnival celebration in Paris draws a reported 250,000 people to a public park called the Escalier de Vincennes. In the French Caribbean scene in France itself, they are already unmistakably a very big deal, but none of that prepares them for Africa. They go on tour there in 1985. Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Angola, Burkina Faso. The African crowds are not just large, they are staggering. Tens of thousands of people who somehow already know every word, because the tapes had already been smuggled in and copied by hand. And also because French radio, specifically a program on Radio France International, had been playing them across the continent. There's a reason the connection is instant instead of earned slowly. Part of that reason is rhythmic. The patterns Kassav is playing share real bones with Congolese rumba, which is a hugely popular style across Central Africa, so African ears have something familiar to hold on to, even through an unfamiliar language. But underneath the musical explanation is something harder to put in a sentence, and the band members themselves have spent decades trying, and mostly failing, to fully articulate it. Their ancestors were taken from this continent centuries ago, in chains, on ships, to build sugar wealth for French planters on islands most people in Africa had never heard of. And now their music, built out of what those ancestors carried with them and passed down generation to generation, mostly in secret, was arriving back on that same continent, filling stadiums and welcomed like family nobody knew they still had. Which brings us back to that night in Luanda in September of 1985. Angola, at that exact moment, is roughly 10 years into a civil war that will not fully end until 2002. Surprisingly, none of that stops tens of thousands of people from filling a stadium to hear this French Creole band. It is the single largest crowd of the entire tour, and by every account, the night nobody in the band ever fully got over. And something else happens because of nights like this one, though it takes years to fully show itself. Angola becomes one of the countries Kassav returns to again and again through the rest of the 1980s. And the sound seeps into what young Angolan musicians are making. Zouk becomes one of the threads, alongside others, in a slow, many-sided mixing that eventually produces something new. Kizomba, which is now one of the most widely danced styles across the Portuguese-speaking world. Zouk is not the whole reason it exists, but it is one of the reasons, a real one, and it's traceable. So a Caribbean sound, built from African rhythms and French colonial history, crosses back to Africa and helps grow something new there. In 1989, Kassav plays 3 concerts in what was then the Soviet Union. For years afterwards, the band's own official biography and nearly everyone who has repeated it since has described this as a historic first, the first black group ever to perform in the USSR. It was not, though. 11 years earlier, in 1978, a group called Boney M had already toured the Soviet Union. Now, Boney M was a very different kind of act, a studio project assembled in Germany, but its singers were black and Caribbean born, from Jamaica, from Montserrat, and from Aruba. They had already played there to enormous crowds over a decade before Kassav ever set foot in Leningrad. So the claim that gets repeated about Kassav in the Soviet Union simply isn't true. But there is a narrower, more accurate version of it that is true. Like they were the first fully Caribbean band to tour there, or maybe the first to play Leningrad specifically. Something like that. In the end, it's an achievement for both bands, and a win for the Caribbean. Jacob Desvarieux dies in 2021 from complications of COVID-19. He is 65 years old. By then, Kassav has been a band for over 40 years. They have recorded more than 50 albums between the group and its members' solo work, and have played in about 80 countries. Please pardon my literal French. The core of the band, Jocelyn Berroir, Jean-Philippe Martelly, Jean-Claude Namreau, Pierre Décimus, keep touring after his death, and they still tour today. The story of Kassav is one that keeps inspiring beyond the existence of the band itself. Because a group of musicians from 2 small islands, built by people who grew up being told their own language did not count as real French, created a sound that held every piece of where they came from. And they managed to conquer the heart of the continent where much of that sound originated from, which is a beautiful bridge across time and space that only music can build that way.